Today, we're talking about what happens in the mind. This human Gubla Abangado, whatever the name is. I told you it's 6 a.m. I'm a little delirious right now. But in the mind of an athlete during their biggest pivots. And I just looked it up. For all the people that's about to get on me. Medulla oblongata, whatever. Welcome back to Still an Athlete, the podcast where we explore life after the game and the people brave enough to rewrite their story when they leave the court or the field or whatever they play on. I'm Dominique Wilson, and today's episode is a little different, but one I believe is deeply necessary. And it is 6 a.m. in the morning here in Atlanta. That's because our host is all the way out in Australia and it's 8 p.m. their time. So if I look a little crazy, it's because I just rolled out of bed. But thank you for joining me today and enjoy the episode. Good morning, everyone on my side. Good evening on Michael's side. So that is our special guest for today. So today's guest has been in more locker rooms than most of us. He is a sports and performance psychologist, co-founder of the Mind Room in Australia with over 2 decades in the mental health field. Our guest has dedicated his career to supporting athletes across various sports like AFL, rugby union, football, cycling, swimming, and track. And beyond your professional endeavors, you are a proud father of three boys. I'm sure you stay active by leading the Mind Room, like mixed netball team, and your holistic approach that, help athletes' well-being off the field that is also crucial in their performance on it. So, I wanted you on my show, Still an Athlete, because the mental side of sports is everything, especially when it comes to the game ending for athletes. And, you are someone who really gets what happens in the mind of an athlete who's walking away from their identity and how they can rebuild it again. And you are a special guest. So before I go on, I just want to know, do you want to be called Dr. Inglis, Michael? What do you prefer?
No, just Michael's good. Thank you.
Michael's okay. We'll do that. So, Michael, like, what's going on in your world these days? Like, what's keeping you curious, energized, or challenged?
Every day has a bit of a mix. I mean, I guess in my roles, the Mind Room it was first a psychology practice, and then we became also a performance consulting business as well. So, every day, or not every week, to some degree, I'm looking across the whole practice and business. We have a sports psychology team in the Mind Room. So there's a particular team that specialises in sport performance. So I kind of give them a lot of guidance and supervision each week. And then I have my specific sporting consults, and that can be different between working with some coaches, working with some leaders, working with some players or a group or team. So, and that can change from week to week based on focus on Olympic sports, professional sports, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, cool. Nice. And what was your journey getting into sports psychology? I know you mentioned doing youth work in different realms of psychology, but, for my listeners out there now discovering you, like, could you just give a brief background?
I was always pretty sporty as a kid, and I was really kind of interested in that field the whole time. And then it kind of clicked early uni days where I just started getting more and more interested in the mind and how people worked and function and so on. And then I just had a topic, I think it was second year, there was a sports psychology topic, and it really got my attention, and I just decided from there that that's what I wanted to do. So after my kind of what we call over here is an undergrad, I could start working in different kind of groups. Like that's when I started youth work and did other drug and alcohol fields and so on and so forth. And then I went and went to my master's stage of sports psychology, which is I think a bit different to the American system. And then once I finished that master's, that gave me allowance to start working into sport, and I haven't looked back since.
Okay, so like what inspired your love for people and wanted to help them live a better well, live better in their
Yeah.
lives. Hmm.
Well, like I think a lot of people. I guess I was touched by mental health at a young age. Someone quite close to me, and that I saw, I guess, a lot of the heartbreak because of that. And probably understand. I guess what going to psychologist helped me understand that a little bit better as well. And then I think I've always been a compassionate, empathic person, and always really sensitive to what people are feeling and what they're going through. And kind of combine that with when I was an athlete, I reckon I needed some guidance, and I was fairly good, but never elite. But in hindsight, I reckon if I had someone like myself or another sports psychologist who could guide me, that would have been really, really helpful at different times. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, I can agree with that. I just got back from Latvia playing professional basketball, but it's been like,
Oh,
yeah, but it's been times in my career where, yeah, the mental aspect was hard, especially traveling overseas and being there for like 6, 8 months, sometimes
hmm.
longer. Yeah, having someone like you, if you would have been in my corner, that would have been awesome. But had
Yeah.
to figure it out myself. But yeah, like Michael, you've worked with athletes through transition, retirement, even injuries. Like what's happening
Hmm.
psychologically during that kind of shift in identity when an athlete, let's say, is walking away from their sport involuntarily or voluntarily.
Yeah, like obviously it's a really, really tricky time. I have kind of different thoughts around it all, in different kind of ways. It really does depend on the presentation and how they're coping or not coping with it. But I'm actually a really big believer overall that athletes attain a lot of skills when they're an athlete, if that makes sense. Like just things like structure, time management, dealing with different types of personalities. They've got a lot of professional skills with their discipline, like getting to bed on time, eating well. And I actually think they're really good systems already that actually holds them up for the rest of their life. So I really like to kind of gauge from them what they've learned being an athlete and what they can still take away, particularly a lot of the skills they learned over that time. Um, but of course, it depends on how they're leaving their sport and why that might be. Like we know that most athletes feel forced out and don't have a choice, and um, that they find it really difficult emotionally, and they're still grieving about that. So you need to help process those feelings and that stage. But I'm still quite keen to hold what they've got already and still put it into place, even though it may not be on the sporting field. They can still use those skills for everyday life.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. What would you say to an athlete that really doesn't know like where to pivot after sport? Like they don't like that's all they had. They don't know, what else to
Hmm.
do after that.
Well, I mean, before I answer that question, I think the point that you make is that, in my opinion, that conversation should have started at the beginning of their career, athletic career. So we
Mm.
don't get to a phase of, oh, what do I do next? Or I don't know where to pivot. Um, in my mind, once you start being an athlete, you start working on that next phase, because if you actually look at the block of life, and I know every sport's different, but let's just say average amount of 10 to 15 years, that's only 10 to 15 years. So what's going to happen after that? So we need to start planning in whilst we're in that athletic career mode. However, you're right, it still does happen. So um, in terms of pivoting, it's like, well, what how do we? What are their interests? What are their skills? What have they learnt over a period of time? Because a lot of them do have developed skills as well, and other trades or other training and so on and so forth. Um, and I think the other part obviously depends on what athlete you are. But what I've noticed, like I worked with a cyclist who went to the Olympics last year. What I was surprised when she was going through this, she was trained and skilled, but she had so many opportunities come her way. So once you do hit a high level, a lot of opportunities are there, a lot of connections are made, and sometimes
Mm.
using those connections and speaking to them about what are the opportunities around them, and getting some mentorship can be quite helpful.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, mentorship goes a long way because you don't know what you don't know unless, you follow someone that was in your shoes before and, can really guide you out of that. But you talk about like holistic performance being person first, athlete second. Can you go a little bit more on like what that means? Like, what does that mean in a practical sense?
Yeah, well, it kind of fits to what I said before, right? Like, in a sense, we don't want our athletes surprised at the end of their career that, okay, now I've got to find something to do. The holistic part is, in particularly around their identity in this case, is that yes, they're going to be an athlete all the time. We want to harness that as best we can to get the best out of them. But we also want to kind of find out what another career they can start looking at or start applying. Whether it's the subject at the time or getting some work experience. But we still want to take the humanistic component of their social connections, like their friendship groups, their family, their key supports, and keep them instilled. I think by the time we turn to athletes, their whole world is surrounded by it, and getting outside that space and getting some non-athlete time and connection still is really, really crucial.
Okay. Yeah. So basically just like the world outside of their sport. That's what you're taking in.
Well, yeah, but also where else do they get their self-worth? That's probably the most important question to ask. Is if it's the only place is the athletic component, then that can become dangerous. Where are the other domains where they can feel valuable?
Okay, got you. All right. So for someone, well, it was me coming out of college, NC State, and not being drafted, and then falling into depression because I didn't know. I did a terrible job of trying to figure out what's my purpose outside of sports, but I'm out of that. So for like the athletes that fell into depression, like how do athletes avoid falling into depression or just, feeling lost during that time? So many of my listeners are silently grieving their sport. And, what are some of the tools or first step they can take so they don't feel stuck or like they've felt like they peaked and they don't have access to someone like you?
Yeah, do you mind is it okay if I ask you a couple of questions
Yeah, go
about
ahead.
your experience?
Yeah,
Hope it
sure.
doesn't bring anything. If it doesn't bring anything up, just tell me to quit. If it does, but why do you think you sunk so quickly when you didn't get drafted?
Oh, because I put so much time and effort. Basketball was my life. I would say middle school, high school. I missed a lot of the young years, my teenage years of like partying or, the normal stuff. And I was in the gym working out. So that was my goal. And when I didn't achieve my goal, I didn't really have a plan B, even though I graduated, with my degree. I wasn't planning on using that so early. So I think that's why I fell into depression. And then I kind of was around the wrong people at that time because their goals were flourishing and I just felt like the oddball out. And I really didn't have no one to talk to. I couldn't really go to family. Like no one understood. So I was alone in that moment.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting though, right? When I hear like that consortium of answers, right? It's like there's a lot of sacrifice, and sometimes when we sacrifice a lot, we want the reward at the other end. And sport's really cruel, isn't it? Like it leads us to believe, and we get told this as well: the harder you work, the more rewards you get, and that's a reasonable equation, but it's not a fail-proof one either. And sometimes that's really harsh, right? When you put everything in and don't get your way, and that's a hard realization, and that's why a lot of people do sink, right? Because you had so much faith, I
Yeah.
imagine, in that philosophy.
Yeah. Sunk hard, definitely had a lot of faith. But I kept going and I ended up playing professionally anyways. It was just, not being drafted. That was, that was pretty hard.
Which is another rich leadership part as well, is like, yeah, you bounced anyway. So, um, which like sometimes we don't realize it's just our first opportunity, not our last. And so this is what's helpful when we're in this phase, right? Is talking it out with somebody, particularly obviously if they're trained, to go, hang on, there's still opportunities, there's challenges, opportunities here.
Yeah.
Like this is not a dead end road. So let's explore that. And so, you need to, of course, you need to be able to process that disappointment. But if the door's still open, then like let's find ways to keep that open, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's just 22-year-old me I was not thinking like that.
Well, that's right. So when you're kind of asking the question, like around that age, particularly, you are dealing with young people who just haven't had the life experience, maturity, kind of process all of this. So again, it's really, really helpful to go and seek that assistance, right? Because with the right guidance, you can get different perspective, can help you process that disappointment and grief, and then give you a different outlook or a new outlook that might be more helpful in the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it sounds like you had some structures, like you'd finished uni. You had good supports around you. You didn't access them, but they were there, and they're the good building blocks that can help us rebound.
Yeah, because I could have went back to school at NC State and probably could have talked to a psychologist there or just reached out to some of the support system there. But I don't know, for some reason, my brain wasn't thinking like that. It was just like, I didn't get drafted. Boo-hoo, what next? And then I just went through that period. And then finally I was like, all right, you have to get up. You have to figure it out. You can't just keep feeling sorry for yourself. So that's where I was. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we all have our different stories with it, don't we, in terms of how long it takes and so on. But nice to hear you bounce back. And you might have gone through a phase where you did try things that you sacrificed for a period of time, but you didn't like it, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to you, does this approach also apply to athletes after sports when they're pivoting careers or purpose?
Yeah.
So
No. Yeah. I mean, I think the difference between your story and their story is most of the time at the end of their career, that is the end. So that is the processing of it.
Yeah.
As I said before, I think we hope that we've got some other skills to go to. We hope that they're better prepared. I guess, what we need to do though is I'm actually quite proactive in going through the grieving process when it is the end, meaning I'm actually quite happy to be with them in that depressive stage or that grieving stage for quite a period of time until they're ready to get out. Because I think too many times that the society, if you like, want them to really go, oh, you'll be right, you'll be okay, you can do this, and so on and so forth. It's actually no, but they're also allowed to feel really down and really upset and really miss being an athlete for as long as they need until they're ready to come out the other side. Like I think sometimes we hit the panic button when someone's feeling down, as opposed to that's actually quite okay.
Yeah.
And then once I think you do, I think you can then go, okay, so when they're ready, you were there to meet them. And so what does this look like? Tell me what your new life looks like. And the new beginnings start shooting through and they start talking about it. Mm-hmm. And then as their psych, you can kind of you see that and you can go with them and then you can just encourage, what does that look like? What are the next steps? What are some goals? What are the different behaviors we're looking towards? What are the values that we can still harness from being an athlete? But you know what? I find a lot of the time that surprise a lot of people that we often also don't talk about all the crappy things that being an athlete has, and you have to say goodbye to those things as well. Like, we think it's all glorified, but it's actually not, a lot of it. And it's actually things that we don't like in terms of being an athlete. And we have to say goodbye to those things. But when we're grieving, we're not ready for that. But later on, you go, actually, do you know what? I actually don't miss the early mornings. I don't miss the, having to eat well all the time. And I don't miss being told where I need to be at every single hour of the day. Like, there's lots of things that I actually don't miss.
Yeah. I agree. I agree because I'm going into retirement. And literally, I broke my wrist, but I'm better now. Like I can do all this. And my agent was literally like, "All right, so are you thinking about next year?" And I'm like, "I don't know if I miss all the injuries and just broke my wrist." I was like, "I don't know if I'm going back." So I get that for sure, and just talking to it with them. But do you find that there's differences, but mindset wise, between like pro athletes or and college athletes and how they handle these transitions?
Yeah, I mean it's actually well, I'll use the difference between professional athletes and Olympic athletes. Or so professional
Mm-hmm.
athletes are generally better, obviously, really well paid because they're paid to play, right?
Yeah.
And so, in a weird way, they're the best set up because they got the financial rewards already. But often seem to be the worst in transitioning because they are so financially rewarded. They haven't invested in themselves for the next phase of their life. Where the non-professional, like the Olympic sports or the college sports, they generally have had to really work or work on something else because they haven't been financially remunerated for what they do. So they're actually much better equipped to the transition because they've had to. So, for example, a lot of the domestic cyclists I've worked with, they all were like professions already whilst I was cycling 4 to 5 hours a day. And so they were ready anyway. They were doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. But would you say like it's different now with the NIL deals? Because the college players are getting paid a lot, like professional athletes, some more. So do you think it will be a change now or in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking I'm probably less familiar with the American system than the Australian system. So the Australian system doesn't have a college and a pro. It's like amateur or pro. So it's very different. So if that's the case where you've got college athletes getting well paid as well, then yeah, they're going to be quite similar to that. But I guess what I'd say is they're in a college system, so surely they get the opportunity have the options to study and do a course or find what their interests are
Mm,
for the next stage, for the next step of their career.
okay. Yeah,
Mm.
that makes sense. All right.
Mm.
Well, I know we're getting close to our time. Uh, like, is there any last thing you want to say before I get into like two weird, funny questions I always ask at the end?
Okay. Probably the one thing I probably haven't spent enough time on is just talking about people's values and how they're real staples through their
Mm,
athletic life and their day to day life. And so I think values based work is really, really helpful to help you go through this transition because when you feel closely connected to those values, I think that overall helps the transition because you actually know that they're still you, whether you're performing or not. Um, so they're quite grounding. That's a very kind of grounding approach I find for many athletes.
okay. And what is an example of value based work?
Well, firstly, identifying them, what they are for you, like your own individual values in terms of how you want to live your life. Um, and then reflecting, well,
Okay.
are you currently connected to them in your day to day, and whether it be decisions making or your actions. And if there's gaps there, how do we fill them? If there's going to be gaps there in our transition, how do we fill them, and so on and so forth.
Got you. Okay. Thanks for clearing that up. Got it. All right. So, first cool question. What's your favorite athlete of all time? And would you want to be them for 24 hours?
Well, because it's only 24 hours, yes, because I've been known to do all the hard work. um,
Yeah.
um, probably I'm going to sound a bit. I'm trying to think more on the world stage. But there's this Australian swimmer called Kieran Perkins who won the gold medal in, I think it's the '96 Atlanta Games. He won '92 and in the 1500 meters and won '96. But it was I call it my favorite event because I think he was unwell or was struggling and qualified eighth, which is the last qualifying spot for the final. And in the final, he just went out really aggressively in the first 100 meters and was leading by like 10 lengths. and held on for dear life until the very end. And I just remember being the most inspiring performance I've ever seen, because he was down and out, like, completely. And he just took the challenge up to the rest of the group in a 1,500 meter swimming event, which is brutal, and hung on.
Wow, that's okay. So I guess I had to do my homework and go on YouTube and watch that, because I haven't
Yeah, you should.
about that. That's
you won't
crazy.
get the story and the headlines around it, but you'll get you'll see the actual event. Yeah, it was pretty incredible.
Okay, cool. And last one. If aliens landed tomorrow and said, take us to your leader, but you get to decide who represents Earth, it can be a celebrity, cartoon, athlete, it can be anyone. Who are you picking and why?
Who am I picking and why? Well, not Donald Trump.
No, we don't need them to meet Donald Trump. No.
Okay, let's go with Roger Federer. He's like if someone could lead, an athlete, a famous athlete could lead the world with like composure and class, it would have to be a Fed, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super fair. What sport is he in?
He's a tennis player, Roger Federer.
Oh, sorry.
No?
I haven't. I don't watch tennis like that. I'm sorry.
Basketball, don't I?
Yeah, no, just a tad bit. I mean, yeah.
we can take it to MJ.
The only time I catch
Kobe.
tennis is Kobe. Yes, well, that's my favorite player for sure. But the only time I watch tennis is if it's on by accident. But I love the sport. It's just I'm not caught up with everyone, and I'm so sorry. Yeah,
he's like the king. He's like the best ever.
Okay, so now I have two
and
people
he's very
to
graceful
watch.
and just very, he has a good presence about him, you can just see him lead the world well. He has a good presence about him,
Okay, but well, now I have two people to watch, so thanks for the homework. I appreciate it.
You've got homework to do.
Yeah, but where can people contact you, learn more about you and your business?
Yeah, so I'm based in Melbourne, in Australia. We're very in the city of Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
We're themindroom.com.au. You can catch me there. If you're an Australian, you're probably quite well known in Australia, I guess, in terms of one of the bigger practices who do kind of a lot of performance-based work. So look at the website. You can get me from there. Via my reception or whatever that might be, and welcome any questions or any shout outs.
All right. Well, I'm definitely going to put your website link and everything in the show notes. But Michael, thank you for taking the time out. I know it's late over there, so get some rest. And
Thanks,
and thank you for just spilling the beans and helping the people that are listening to my podcast. So I will let you know when I'm going to share it. And again, thank you.
Pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. This conversation reminded me purpose doesn't die when your sports end. But you do need tools, you need support, and most of all, you need to know that your worth was never based on performance. It's built into who you are. If this episode spoke to you, share it with a teammate. Save it or download it so you can come back and re-listen to it. Or share it with a friend who's navigating a transition right now. And remember, your story is not over. You're still an athlete, and you're not alone. Take care for now, and see you in the next episode.